Welcome back, Tigers, to episode 4 of How to Write a Sentence. So far in my How to Write a Sentence series, I have taught you how to write a simple sentence, how to choose the verbs and adverbs for your sentences, creating strong actions for each one of your sentences. And then in my last video, I taught you how to brainstorm descriptions. So now I'm going to teach you something really important, point of view. So your point of view is basically where your story is coming from, who is telling your story and how. And there are different options for who is telling your story. It can be you, the writer, it can be one of the characters, it can be multiple characters. So I'm going to teach you the pros and cons of each one, what are the limitations. This is very important for all of your stories. So let's walk through this together. So today we'll be looking at different points of view in writing, choosing your point of view, and common mistakes with point of view. So there are 3 types of POV in writing: first person, second person, and third person. So first we're going to look at first person point of view. Now first person point of view is when you are writing from the view of the main character. So you will be using words like I, me, my during the entire story. Now, both of my books in my Choose the Ending series are in first person. I have written books in every single point of view. These 2 books were originally written in second person, which I will get to in a minute, but first person has a lot of benefits. One of them being that the reader can see the depth of what a character feels and thinks in a situation. Negative to this is you must create a unique voice for the character. You cannot write as yourself, the writer. You have to write as that character. So that means you have to change your slang, you have to change how you would describe something. You have to be inside that character's mind and then project all of their thoughts as that person. Another thing about writing in first person is that it adds an element of mystery because the reader only knows what the character knows. Now this can be both a positive and a negative. So you have to think about how much information you want the reader to know. First person is often found in romance stories. If you read any sort of romantic novels, mine included, sometimes the stories will switch between first person with the male and female character. So the first chapter will be the female lead character in first person, and then the second chapter will be the male lead character in first person. This is quite common in romance stories. It kind of adds the excitement of watching both characters fall in love. My books, however, don't do that. They just stay with one character the entire time, the whole way through. I did that because these books are more of romantic suspense, so in order to keep the suspense, I have to only give the reader information that the characters know. If I switch between multiple characters, it gives them too much information. Another place you might see this is in mystery stories. The reader will only know the clues that the character knows. Now, as your character goes about their day, maybe the reader will pick up on things that the character doesn't, and that's when you know you're an artist. And also some stories that use this are bystander stories, a first-person perspective of someone involved in the entire story, but is not directly the main character. A really, really good example of this would be The Great Gatsby. It's told from the perspective of someone associated with Gatsby, but not Gatsby himself. So I'm going to give you an example of first person. This is actually from my book, The Rebellion, taken directly from the book. So let me read it to you. I kept it short this time because I still suck at voice acting. So let's try this out. Suddenly, my feet were knocked under me. The world turned upside down and I was looking up at the stars. And also to a man with a sword at my throat. His eyes were as dark as the sky behind him, his black and blue robes swirling around his feet. He smirked. "This is a very dangerous place for you, sweetheart," his gravelly voice hummed, dark as the shadows around his face. "Haven't you heard the rumors? I went through an awful lot of trouble to spread them." I think that was a little bit better. We're getting there. I need to find some voice acting lessons. That's really what it comes down to. So as you can see from this example, I use my feet, I was looking up, my throat, and the way that I describe the order of events is through the eyes of the character. So the first thing that happens is the character falls to the ground and is looking up at the stars. Then she sees the man holding a sword at her throat, and then she sees his eyes, and then she hears his voice. And that's the way that she recalls the story. You have to make sure to do it in an order that the character would remember, not the way that you would tell the story if you were the narrator. Remember, in first person, you are not the narrator. You are the transcriber telling the story from the point of view of the character. Now let's look at second person. Second person is a very rare point of view to use, and it's not usually used for commercial use. But it's actually a lot of fun if you want to practice with it. So the way that you use second person is that you address the reader directly. You use words like you and your. Now you can use this in two different ways. The first option is to have the reader be the main character. The second option is to be an acquaintance of the reader, writing a letter or telling the reader of something that happened to you. You'll find the second one in some really older classical novels. A really good example of this would be the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. This book is basically a series of letters written by a demon who trains other demons. So the Screwtape Letters is a second POV story where the head of an organization that teaches demons how to damn the souls of human beings is writing directly to a subordinate. Now the subordinate has a name and it's a full character, but at the same time the reader is only reading words like you and your, talking directly to the reader themselves. So again, there are multiple options with this. Now the benefit of using second person is the reader is fully immersed in the story. They are the character no matter what. But the negative is going to be the mechanics of using second person. Now you can do things like what the Screwtape Letters did, and you can have a real character being written to. Or if you want to use the reader specifically as the main character, you have to think of things, well, how are you going to use name and gender and their looks, things like that. Now you can use your voice or you can use the voice of another character. You have voice flexibility. So you can choose any voice. You can choose to use your own narrative voice or you can choose the narrative voice of a character. The negative of this point of view is that it's usually not used for commercial use. Now, if you're a self-publisher like me, it really doesn't matter. And there are some books on the market that use specifically second person. Normally they don't market or sell as well, so publishing companies will probably be more hesitant to use books with this point of view. So make sure you think about that before you try to pitch this book to a traditional publishing company or before you put in all the finances to self-publish a second person book that probably won't sell very well. You can always be the exception to the rule, but don't count on it. But you can find second person in different stories. One of those places you'll really find a lot of second person is stories where you can choose what happens in the book. There are a few commercial books with second person, one of them being the Choose Your Own Adventure series. That's a series I grew up on for a really long time. There's a ton of books in this series. I remember it being very popular as a kid, and a newer one that just came out is called My Lady's Choosing, and it's the same idea. You can choose the events that happen in the book. Now usually you end up flipping back and forth. Choose event A, flip to page 75. Choose B, flip to page 14. My books were originally written in second person, but I changed it to first person because I really wanted to tell the story from different characters' points of view. Also, I just didn't want to go through the mechanics of how do I address the reader throughout the entire thing. It just made more sense to create a full character with a full character arc, so it was a full story. And my books are a little bit different anyways because you don't flip back and forth. You actually just choose the ending after reading the entire storyline. I don't like the flipping back and forth because it breaks my concentration and focus. So after writing these books completely in second person for my website, I then switched them into first person for publication. And that was a beast to do, let me tell you. Which brings me to another type of story that you will see second person a lot in, fan fiction. Now fan fiction gets a bad rep. It's considered really amateurish, and to be fair, a lot of it is really amateurish, but every great writer was an amateur at one point, so I don't see anything wrong with fan fiction. Fan fiction is great practice as a writer, and any practice you make is worth the time. Also, if you really think about it, a lot of things are fan fiction. Think of Sherlock Holmes. I hate to break it to you, but the Sherlock Holmes series is fan fiction. Now, it's professional fan fiction made by really great writers who wrote for a really long time, but if you're writing a series about a character who already existed, you're writing fan fiction. And the fun thing about writing fan fiction online is you can really put the reader into the story. You can use abbreviations such as YN for your name and your eye color in brackets for the reader's eye color. If there is a fan group that you're part of and you can practice your writing and bounce ideas off of each other, go ahead and go for it. Just use an anonymous name, have some fun, don't worry about it. Writing fan fiction is a great way to practice. And another really big place you will see second person will be video games. Now, this will usually be video games that are really heavily text-based, because the point of video games is to immerse the player completely. Now, I actually have my undergraduate degree in video game design, and because of the video games I like to play, I have seen second person a lot. It's really popular in like the really old style games, like the DOS games that I used when I was growing up, or it's also popular in visual novels that you can usually play on your mobile phone. Now, the great thing is you can choose which voice you want to use, so you can kind of mix your voice with the character's voice, and I'm going to show you how I did that with the Rebellion. Your feet were knocked out under you. The world turned upside down and you found yourself looking up at the stars. There's also a sword pointed at your throat. The eyes of its wielder are as dark as the sky behind him, his black and blue robes swirling around his feet. He smirked. "This is a very dangerous place for you, sweetheart," his gravelly voice hummed, dark as the shadows around his face. "Haven't you heard the rumors? I went through an awful lot of trouble to spread them." Now, as you can see, the narration is a little bit different. I took out the word suddenly. I don't know why, it just kind of bothers me in second person. And also I tried to make it a little more punchier. Instead of saying that there's a man pointing a sword at my throat, I just point out the sword right away. So there's a sword pointed at your throat. That makes it a little punchier. And also the reader doesn't really know what's happening. You have to reveal everything in real time. And the last one we're going to look at is third person. Now, the third person point of view is when you're telling the story as an outsider, using words like he, she, they, his, hers, etc. You're telling the story as the narrator. So you can put in as much information or as little information as you want. So the benefit of using this style is that you can use your true voice. You don't have to worry about creating a fresh voice for each character using their narrative voice for the story. But of course, the negative side to this is you need to have a strong writer's voice. If you don't know your voice yet, you're going to get too obsessed with your own words, and you're going to start to get really flowery and wordy in your attempts to not look like an amateur. Your goal as a narrator is to make sure the reader doesn't know you're there. So the benefit is you get to use your voice. The downside is you don't want to bring any attention to yourself as the writer. Another great thing about third person is if you have a lot of characters, you can show different events from different characters throughout your books or throughout your series. So the positive is you don't have to focus on one character for the entire story. For each scene, you can focus on a different character and show different events happening at different places at different times. But the negative to this is that the reader is going to feel a little more distant from the characters. They can't immerse themselves into the book like they could if you're using first or second person. Now, you'll find third person everywhere. Third person is a very popular storytelling point of view. So you'll find it in stories with lots of characters. The Spirit Animals is a great example of this. Usually each chapter goes to a different main character and shows the events happening in each character's realm of the woods. And then another place you're going to find this is just general fiction. General literary fiction is more focused on using the author's voice and showing day-to-day activities. Even stories with one or two characters might choose this point of view because of the flexibility it gives you when showing the events through different characters. And the last place that I really recommend that you use third person would be action stories. And I say this because when people get into a fight, they don't really remember what they do. When you're in a fight, most of it is reflexes and most of it is things you have been practicing if you are a martial artist. And I know this because I've done martial arts for 11 years and I can barely tell you the things that I've actually done. Only a couple times do I really remember because they were just so weird. One time I was sparring with a partner and I panicked and I actually tickled him. And he was just as surprised as I was that I did that. So we both just stopped in the middle of sparring because we weren't sure what just happened. Now, of course, as a writer, you can break that rule. Both of my books have a lot of fighting scenes and I do use first person. Now, the way that I kind of break the rule, I guess you could say, with these books is while I'm writing in first person, I'm actually teaching you real martial arts techniques. So when I use first person, I usually try to fit in what the character actually physically does and why they do it, just in case it might help the reader in a pinch. Now, don't use these as your martial arts instructions. They're not really that detailed, and you really need to go practice with a real sparring partner. But long story short, if you're using action stories, it's more comfortable for the reader if you kind of separate a little bit from the character. Now I'll show you the same scene in third person. The main character's name is Jaehwa. Jaehwa's feet slipped under her, the world suddenly turned upside down. In a moment she found herself looking up at the stars, and also at a man with a sword pointed at her throat. "This is a very dangerous place for you, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "Haven't you heard the rumors? I went through an awful lot of trouble to spread them." He smirked, his eyes as dark as the sky behind him. His black and blue robes swirled around his feet as he stepped forward and inched the sword closer to her throat, no mercy in his expression. Now, if you've noticed from the other two scenes, I changed a little bit of the order. If you notice, I switched the paragraphs of the description of his eyes and what he says. And I switched that because if I am standing apart from the story, if I'm just watching it like a drama, the first thing I'm going to notice as the narrator is not the dude's eyes. In first person, that's the first thing that Jaehwa noticed because she is laying on the ground looking up at him. As the narrator, I'm probably going to hear his voice first. So I put it in the second paragraph, kind of using my own voice more. First person was Jaehwa's voice. Third person is my voice. And also there's a different action in there if you noticed. The point where he inches the sword closer. If you're on the ground and someone's inching the sword, you might not notice it if you're looking up at their eyes. But since I'm standing farther away from the story, I'm not the main character, I can see all that's happening. So this is what I mean by if you use third person, you can use as much information as possible. First person is very limiting because you can only see what the character's seeing. Third person, you see everybody at once, so you can narrate the whole scene. So when you're choosing a point of view, the first thing you need to think about is the amount of information you want to share with the reader. So first person, the reader knows only what the main character knows. Second person, you must reveal everything to the reader in real time. And third person, the writer gives a bird's eye view of all events. They can see all of the people at once. The second thing you need to think about is which voice you want to use. So if you want to use the voice of the character, first person. In second person, you can use a narrative voice, that's your voice, or you can use a character voice. It's completely up to you. It has more flexibility. And if you use third person, you'll be using your own voice. Another big factor of point of view is how many characters are there. First person is great for standalone novels. Now you can make a series with first person, that's not a problem. However, series usually have more characters, and if you want to switch between the different characters, third person is going to be much better. Second person can only be the point of view of the reader, and it's only really used in standalone stories. Now, if you think about the Choose Your Ending novel series, each book is a stand-alone story in a series. And the last thing to think about is how connected to the story do you want the reader to be? So first person is going to have great immersion. The reader can think of themselves as the main character. Second person is the most immersive you can get. The reader is the main character, and so you can't be more immersed than that. And then third person is the least immersive. The reader will be watching the story. They might adopt themselves to a character, but really they'll just be standing on the outside. So let me tell you some common mistakes with point of view, and then let me also tell you how to break the rules a little bit. So the first mistake that I see is character flipping. Okay, so when I say character flipping, I mean flipping between the thoughts and emotions of more than one character in one scene. So sometimes what happens is a writer will choose third person because they want to describe all of the thoughts and emotions and feelings of all of the characters all at once. I used to do this as well until a lot of editors told me to stop doing it. And the problem with doing that is that it makes the readers dizzy. It's really hard for your reader to get to know the characters if you keep flipping between the different characters. So imagine it this way. Imagine that you are at a party and there are a bunch of new people and you have to remember all of their likes, dislikes, and personality traits in a few minutes. You're probably not going to, and you're not going to be able to connect with anyone very well. And even if you do connect with somebody, you're just going to forget everybody else in the picture. So the rule of thumb, even in third person point of view, is to only only have the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of one character per scene. This allows the reader to build a strong attachment to that character before they move on to another character. And then another problem I've seen a lot is switching inconsistently. Now, I mentioned before that some romance writers will switch between the female lead point of view and the male lead point of view. And that's totally fine if you have a good rhythm with it. I have found some novels, though, that do this inconsistently. So instead of doing one female lead, one male lead, one female lead, one male lead, they'll do like 2 female, 3 male, 1 female, 1 male, 3 female. It really messes up your reader when you do that. It seems really messy. It doesn't seem planned. And it messes with the story rhythm and it makes you look like an amateur. I'm just gonna say it straight out. I know there's a lot of successful writers that do that, but I don't think it looks good. I don't think it's something writers should consistently do. So think of it this way. Imagine listening to a slow jazz song just to have it switch to metal halfway through. There are songs that do that. There are a lot of popular songs that do that. But if every song did that, it would be so annoying. So the best thing to do is to create a rhythm for your reader, establishing it in the first 5 chapters so they know what to expect for the next page. And then the biggest problem, especially for first person, is no unique voices. If you are using first person, you need a unique character voice. If you don't, all of your characters sound the same and your reader will get bored really, really fast. It's kind of the same idea of sitting at the table with 5 people who have no emotions in their voice, don't like anything, and don't want to talk to you. Or another thing that I see writers do is just kind of copy the voice of what they think the reader thinks like. They don't build a proper character. They don't build a proper character arc. They just create a trope, or they just create a very flat character. And if you are a writer, you need to take your characters seriously. Your readers will only connect to characters that are full of life, ones that the reader can relate to, is intrigued by, or wants to become. So take your characters seriously, please, for the love of God. Now, of course, as a writer, you can always break any rule, but you have to know the rules before you break them. Also, you have to have an answer to why you're breaking the rules. Don't just break the rules to be a rebel. You're really not that cool. Cool writers have a reason to do it. And don't be lazy about it. Don't choose to break a rule just because you're too lazy to create a unique voice, or you're too lazy to write the events of multiple characters. If you're breaking a rule, make sure you're breaking it for a good reason and one that will contribute to your story. I have an example of this. I wrote an online story called Marriage of Inconvenience, and it was a romance, and so I used first person female lead and then first person male lead, and then I would randomly use a third person point of view of an event outside. Now, I had strategically placed these very specifically, and the reason that I did it this way is because the male and female lead had their problems, but they were so involved in their problems that they weren't really aware of what was happening outside of their problems. And so I used the third person perspective to show the problems that were starting to build kind of the climax that came later in the story. Now, I established this early so my readers weren't just blindsided by it, but it really contributed to the story. I have no regrets for doing it. It is definitely a broken rule, but one that I used for a very specific reason. So now we've reached the end of this very long video about point of view. So let's recap. So first things first, different points of view. You can choose between first person, it tells the story using I, me, or my. Second person tells the story using you and your, and third person tells the story using she and he, they, his, hers. And when you're choosing a POV, decide how much information you want to show, whose voice you want to use, the number of characters and books you will be writing in this story, and how connected you want the reader to be to the story. And mistakes. Avoid these. Don't flip between multiple characters in one scene. Stick with one character. Don't switch point of views inconsistently. And don't create the same voice for each character. Create a unique voice. So that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for being patient. Thank you so much for getting all the way to the end of it. In my next video, I'm going to be teaching you about sentence lengths. Now, you might not think this is really important in writing, but it's actually extremely important because your sentence lengths determine the pace of your story. So I'm going to teach you different sentence lengths and their uses. And then I'm also going to teach you how to change your sentence length based on the type of scene you're writing. If this was helpful at all, please give it a like and please subscribe because more videos are definitely coming soon. As always, you can put questions in the comments. I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. Is there a point of view that you really like writing in? I like all of them. I have written full-length books in all 3 point of views. I think they're all fantastic. So I will see you tigers later. Keep being beautiful beasts. Peace.